She only wanted a job. That was all. A modest position, a desk, a paycheck, something to quiet her mother's worries and keep food on the table. But fate doesn't whisper politely, it crashes through doors with a storm. And when she stepped into the towering glass building of Orloff Corporation, she had no idea she was walking into the arms of the most feared millionaire CEO in the country. Everyone in the city knew his name. Victor Orloff. They called him ruthless, a man who crushed competitors without blinking, whose cold stare could silence entire boardrooms. Rumors wrapped around him like shadows, broken deals, vanished rivals, whispered scandals. Women, too, whispered his name, but never in the light. To them, he was a figure of danger and desire all at once. She wasn't impressed by rumors. She was too busy worrying about rent, about her shoes worn thin from endless job interviews. So when the secretary called her name, she squared her shoulders and stepped inside his office. The room was all glass and steel, intimidating in its perfection. And there he was, tall, severe, sharp-jawed with eyes like a storm about to break. He didn't smile, didn't even offer her a chair. He simply looked at her. And in that gaze, she felt like he was reading her soul, layer by layer, tearing down her defenses. "Why do you want this job?" His voice was low, gravelly, as though he already knew the answer but wanted to test if she'd lie. Her throat was dry, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "Because I need it. I'll work harder than anyone else you've ever hired." For the first time, something flickered in his expression, not quite a smile, more like curiosity. He leaned back, tapping his fingers against the desk. "You don't fear me?" She almost laughed, though nerves made her voice tremble. "I don't have time to fear people. Fear doesn't pay bills." The silence that followed stretched like a wire about to snap. Then, unexpectedly, he stood and circled the desk, stopping just inches from her. She could smell his cologne, sharp and clean, mingled with something darker, something dangerous. "You're different," he said softly. "That can be dangerous in my world." From that moment, her life unraveled from the ordinary. The job wasn't just a job. It was late nights in glittering boardrooms, being drawn into a world of secrets, power, and a man who terrified everyone, except her. But as days turned into weeks, she saw cracks in his armor. Behind the ruthless CEO was a man haunted by loneliness, by a past he never spoke of. She caught him staring at her when he thought she wouldn't notice, not with hunger, but with something far more vulnerable. And one evening, after another grueling day, when the office lights had dimmed and only the city glowed outside the windows, he asked her quietly, almost against his own will, "Do you believe a man like me can be loved?" Her breath caught. She hadn't expected the question, not from him, not ever. She searched his face, the face feared across industries, and saw not a monster, but a man, wounded, aching, desperate for something more than power. She should have been afraid. Instead, her heart ached for him. And though she didn't yet have the answer, she knew one truth. Her story had just changed forever. Because she hadn't only stepped into a job. She had stepped into a storm of love and danger, into a destiny she could neither escape nor resist. And as Victor's world closed around her, one thing became clear. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive gently. Sometimes, it arrives like a thunderclap, claiming everything in its path. The air between them tightened, as though the whole city outside had stopped breathing just to hear her answer. She didn't speak right away. Something inside her warned that if she gave him even a shred of comfort, her life would no longer belong only to her. And yet, standing there with his eyes fixed on her, full of that question he didn't know how to ask, she couldn't bring herself to turn away. "I don't know if love asks who deserves it," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "Sometimes it just happens. To anyone. Even to you." His jaw tightened. She saw the war inside him, pride against longing, fear against desire. For a man who had conquered entire empires of business, admitting that he craved something so simple must have felt like the greatest defeat. But he didn't answer. He just stepped back, returning to the cold posture of a man who didn't bend for anyone. The days that followed were strange. He kept her close, assigning her tasks that should have gone to whole teams, insisting she attend meetings far above her pay grade. At first, she thought he was testing her, waiting for her to fail. But the way his eyes found hers across crowded rooms told another story. It wasn't about work anymore. He wanted to see her, to know if she could stand in his world without breaking. Others noticed too. The whispers spread like smoke in the corridors of Orloff Corporation. Secretaries glanced up from their desks, managers lowered their voices when she walked by. Some looked at her with pity, others with jealousy. They had seen women come and go in Victor's orbit, usually leaving in tears, with their reputations burned to ash. But she was still there, unscathed, for now. One night, he sent for her after hours. She found him alone in his office, the city lights glittering behind him like stars trapped in glass. He poured 2 glasses of wine, though she had never seen him drink before. "To survival," he said, raising his glass, and when she asked what he meant, he only shook his head. "You'll understand one day." The wine burned her throat, but it warmed her too. He asked her about her life, her childhood, her dreams, her fears. Questions no one in power ever bothered to ask. She told him about her mother, about the small apartment where every corner held memories, about how she had learned to patch her own shoes when money ran out. And as she spoke, she saw something shift in him again, like her words were chiseling away at the stone walls he had built around himself. When she asked him in return about his past, he went silent. For a long time, he stared into the glass in his hand. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "My father taught me 2 things, never trust anyone and never show weakness. I obeyed him, and I built everything you see around me. But sometimes," his voice faltered, rare and raw, "sometimes I wonder if he left me with nothing but an empire and a cage." She didn't answer, because what could she say? The man who terrified an entire industry was, at his core, a prisoner of his own father's voice. She wanted to reach out, to touch his hand, to tell him he was wrong, that cages can break. But something held her back, some fragile line neither of them was ready to cross. The weeks became months. She became his shadow, his confidant, his stormbreaker in meetings when tempers flared. The world outside whispered louder now. Magazines printed her picture beside his, speculating endlessly. "The mystery woman beside Orloff," one headline said. But inside his office, it was quieter, stranger. He was changing, and she was the reason. Yet the danger grew too. Enemies circled him like sharks smelling blood. Rivals noticed his distraction. Deals began to falter. And one evening, as she left the building, a black car pulled up beside her. A window rolled down, and a man she didn't know leaned out, smiling with a chill that froze her blood. "You're getting very close to Victor Orloff," he said. "Careful. Women who get too close usually don't last." Before she could reply, the car sped away, leaving her trembling on the sidewalk. She didn't tell Victor that night. She wasn't sure if it would make him furious or afraid, and she didn't want to be the reason his world cracked further. But the warning lingered in her mind, heavy and poisonous. The next time she saw him, he seemed different too, more restless, as if he sensed threats tightening around him. His eyes followed her everywhere, sharp and protective. One evening, as they stood in the elevator together, he leaned down suddenly, his lips near her ear. "They'll try to use you against me," he said, his voice low and urgent. "If anything happens, you run. You don't look back. Do you understand?" Her chest tightened. She wanted to protest, to tell him she wasn't afraid, that she wasn't going anywhere. But his tone left no room for argument. She only nodded, though inside, something fierce rose in her. She had walked into his world for a job. Now she was willing to fight for him, even if it meant standing against the shadows he had spent a lifetime battling. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake thinking about his question, if a man like him could be loved. And for the first time, she realized she wasn't asking if. She was asking when. Because somewhere between late nights and whispered confessions, she had already given him the answer. And it terrified her more than anything else ever had. But she couldn't stop. Every day she saw the loneliness in his eyes, and every day she wanted to break it. Every time his voice hardened in a meeting, she wanted to be the one who softened it when they were alone. Every moment he let the mask slip, even for a heartbeat, she saw the man he might have been if the world hadn't demanded he become a monster. She didn't just want to work for him anymore. She wanted to stand beside him, even if it meant stepping into the fire. Her conviction deepened each time she saw the storm raging inside him. That night, when she finally drifted into a shallow sleep, her dreams were filled with flashes of his face, those gray, unreadable eyes softening when he thought no one was watching, the trace of a smile that never reached the world. By morning, she understood something dangerous. Love had already chosen her path, and it had chosen Victor Orloff. The next day at work, the tension in the air was different. The corridors buzzed with rumors of a merger, one that could either double Orloff Corporation's power or tear it apart. Victor moved through the building like a commander preparing for war, his expression carved from stone. But when his gaze fell on her, there was a flicker of something else. An anchor, perhaps, the only tether keeping him from being swept away. She sat beside him in the meeting room as executives argued, numbers flying across screens, voices sharp and desperate. Victor said little, but when he spoke, the room obeyed. His authority was absolute. And yet, she noticed the way his hand clenched the pen in front of him, the subtle crack in his calm facade. When the meeting ended and the others scattered, he lingered, staring at the city through the wall of glass. She hesitated before stepping closer, her voice low. "You don't have to carry everything alone." He didn't look at her, but his jaw tightened. "Alone is the only way I've survived." "Maybe surviving isn't enough," she whispered. That made him turn. His eyes searched hers with a hunger she had never seen in them before. Not hunger for power, not even desire, something rawer, more dangerous. Need. He stepped toward her, and for a heartbeat she thought he might close the distance, erase the line that had been stretched so thin between them. But instead, he stopped, inches away, his breath uneven. "You don't understand," he said, his voice husky. "If I let you in, you'll never escape. I won't let you go." Her heart hammered. The warning in his words should have terrified her, but it only pulled her closer to him. "Maybe I don't want to escape." For a moment, silence roared louder than thunder. Then he turned abruptly, grabbing his jacket, locking himself back behind that mask of ruthless control. "Go home," he said without looking at her. "Now." She obeyed, but the words echoed in her head all night. She knew he wasn't pushing her away because he didn't feel anything. He was pushing her away because he felt too much. The following week tested them both. Rivals circled closer, the merger talks turned volatile, and she found herself pulled deeper into Victor's world. He no longer shielded her from the brutality of his empire. He wanted her there, at his side, even when the conversations turned sharp and ugly. And the more time she spent in his orbit, the clearer it became. He was fighting not just for power, but for survival. Late one evening, she returned to the office to find him alone again, sleeves rolled up, tie discarded, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He didn't notice her at first. He was staring at a photograph tucked in the corner of his desk, a rare, old picture of a boy with messy hair standing beside a stern man she recognized instantly as his father. She stepped forward quietly. "That's you." He looked up, startled, then set the photo down with a sharp motion. "It doesn't matter. He's dead. And everything he built, I made it stronger." "But it's still a cage," she said softly. Something in him cracked then. He leaned back, closing his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was barely more than a whisper. "Sometimes I think the only thing I know how to do is fight. I don't know what it means to stop." Her hand trembled as she reached out, daring for the first time to touch him. Her fingers brushed against his wrist, warm and steady. He froze, as though the contact burned, but he didn't pull away. Slowly, his hand turned, his palm opening to hers, and their fingers intertwined. It was the smallest gesture, but it felt like the world shifted. When he finally opened his eyes, they were stripped of their usual steel. Vulnerable. Human. "You shouldn't have done that," he murmured. "Why not?" "Because now I'll never let you go." The admission hung between them, heavy and undeniable. She didn't answer, because she knew there was nothing left to deny. Their paths had tangled, and neither of them could untangle it now. The days after that were different. He didn't confess anything openly, but the way he looked at her changed. He was more protective, more watchful. In meetings, he listened when she spoke, silencing others with a single glance if they dared interrupt her. When they left the office late, his hand hovered at the small of her back, guiding her as though she belonged beside him. And yet, the danger grew sharper. She caught more whispers in hallways, noticed unfamiliar faces lingering too long in the lobby. The black car appeared again one evening, parked across the street from her apartment. She didn't tell him, but he already seemed to know. His security detail doubled overnight, shadowing her every step. One night, she confronted him about it. "I don't need guards, Victor. I'm not afraid." His expression darkened, his voice like a blade. "You should be. They will come for you to get to me. And if anything happens to you—" He broke off, his jaw tightening. "I won't allow it." She stepped closer, her courage trembling but real. "You can't control everything. Not me. Not this." His eyes softened, just barely, but his reply was firm. "Then promise me you won't leave. Promise me you'll stay where I can protect you." She wanted to protest, to tell him she wasn't a possession. But when she saw the fear behind his demand, the fear of losing her, her anger melted into something else. She nodded slowly. "I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, he exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath for years. He reached for her then, not as the ruthless CEO but as the man beneath, desperate and undone. His hands trembled as they framed her face, his forehead resting against hers. No words were spoken, none were needed. In that quiet moment, everything they had fought against gave way. But even as her heart swelled with certainty, a shadow lingered in the back of her mind. This love wasn't simple. It wasn't safe. It was forged in fire, surrounded by enemies, built on the fragile hope that two broken souls could mend each other. And as his arms closed around her, holding her like a man clinging to salvation, she knew this was only the beginning. The storm had not yet broken. It was only gathering, and when it did, it would test everything they had found in each other. The storm was closer than either of them admitted. It showed itself in fragments. An anonymous envelope slipped beneath her apartment door with nothing inside but a single black feather, a threatening silence on the other end of her phone when she answered a call at midnight, the strange sense that footsteps followed her when she walked home. She tried to brush it off, to convince herself she was imagining things, but deep down she knew this wasn't paranoia. Someone was watching. Victor knew too. He didn't say it, but she could see it in the way his jaw locked when his phone vibrated with encrypted messages, in the way his bodyguards whispered hurriedly into earpieces when he passed. He grew more restless, more protective. He drove her home himself some nights, his hand gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "You don't need to do this," she told him one night as the city blurred by in streaks of neon. He didn't take his eyes off the road. "I do. You don't understand how many knives are pointed at me." Her voice softened. "Then let me understand. Stop shutting me out." For a moment, she thought he might ignore her. But at the red light, he turned his head, his eyes shadowed and raw. "If I tell you everything, you'll see what I've done to survive. And you'll hate me for it." "I won't," she whispered. He looked at her for a long time, as though searching for a crack in her certainty. Then the light changed, and without another word, he pressed down on the accelerator. She let it go for now, but the unspoken truth lingered between them like smoke. The next day, he brought her to a gala, an annual gathering of the city's most powerful. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, diamonds, and people who smiled too widely as they plotted each other's downfall. She felt out of place in her borrowed gown, though Victor had insisted it was fitting. He stayed close to her, his hand at her back, his presence a shield against the predatory eyes around them. As they moved through the crowd, she noticed how people looked at him, some with fear, others with admiration, most with envy. And when they looked at her, the calculation was obvious. Who was this woman who had managed to stand beside him? What power did she hold over him? She tried to hold her head high, but her heart pounded when a man in a white suit intercepted them. His smile was too polished, his tone too casual. "Orloff. Always a pleasure." His eyes flicked to her, lingering with a chill that made her skin crawl. "And who is this?" Victor's arm tightened around her. "Someone who doesn't concern you." The man's grin widened. "On the contrary, everything that concerns you concerns me. Especially these days." He extended a hand to her, but she didn't move. His fingers hovered in the air before he dropped them, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Careful, Victor. You know how fragile things can be." The words were wrapped in silk, but the threat beneath them was unmistakable. Victor didn't respond, just steered her away, his hand gripping hers so tightly it almost hurt. When they reached a quieter corner, she pulled back slightly. "Who was that?" His jaw was tight. "No one you need to know." "That's not good enough," she snapped, surprising even herself. "You keep telling me I'm in danger, and then you won't explain. Do you want me to walk blind into whatever this is?" For the first time, his composure cracked. His voice rose, harsh and sharp. "Yes, because if you knew the truth, you'd run. And I can't." He stopped himself, his chest heaving. His hand reached for hers again, gentler this time, his eyes burning. "I can't lose you." Her anger melted into something softer, though her fear remained. She squeezed his hand. "Then trust me enough to stay." He didn't answer, but his silence spoke louder than words. That night, when the gala was over and they were back in his penthouse overlooking the city, he poured himself a drink, something dark, expensive, untouched for years. She sat on the couch, waiting. Finally, he turned to her, glass in hand. "My father taught me that the world is nothing but wolves and prey," he began, his voice low. "He built his empire by devouring men who thought they were safe. I inherited not just his company, but his enemies. And I made new ones of my own." He took a slow sip before continuing. "The man you saw tonight, his name is Morozov. His family once stood alongside mine. Then I destroyed them. He swore he'd ruin me for it. And now he sees you." Her breath caught. "Me?" "Yes. You're the only thing I can't protect with money, power, or threats. You're the only thing that makes me vulnerable. And he knows it." The room was quiet, heavy with the weight of his confession. She should have been afraid. Maybe she was. But more than that, she was struck by the truth he had finally given her. She had asked him to trust her, and now he had. She rose from the couch, crossed to him, and took the glass from his hand, setting it down. Then she looked up at him, her voice steady. "You've spent your whole life building walls, Victor. Maybe it's time to build something else." His hands lifted slowly, hesitantly, before settling on her waist. His eyes searched hers, filled with 1,000 unspoken words. "You don't know what you're choosing," he murmured. "Maybe not," she admitted. "But I know who I'm choosing." The silence that followed was charged, electric. He bent his head toward her, and for the first time, the walls between them broke. His lips brushed hers, gentle at first, almost cautious, as though afraid she might disappear if he touched her too fully. But when she didn't pull away, the kiss deepened, years of restraint unraveling in a single breath. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only the press of his hands, the heat of his body, the storm of emotion he had locked away for too long. She clung to him, her heart racing with the knowledge that this was real, dangerous, inevitable. When they finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers, his voice a ragged whisper. "You've sealed your fate tonight." She smiled faintly, her hand resting over his heart. "So have you." Neither of them slept that night. They talked, whispered, touched, and somewhere in those hours before dawn, something permanent was forged between them. It wasn't fragile anymore. It wasn't tentative. It was a bond that no rival, no threat, no storm could easily break. But the storm was coming nonetheless. And as the first light of morning painted the city in shades of gold, Victor stood at the window, watching, his expression grim. She joined him, slipping her hand into his. He didn't look at her, but his fingers tightened around hers. "They'll come soon," he said quietly. "Morozov won't wait long. And when he does, everything will change." Her heart pounded, but she didn't let go. She had chosen him. Whatever came next, she would face it by his side. And as the city woke beneath them, they stood together, knowing that love had already bound them in a way nothing could undo. The war came, not with the roar of armies, but with whispers, betrayals, and a darkness that crept into every corner of their lives. Morozov did not strike in daylight, with guns or steel. He struck where Victor had always been strongest, his empire. One by one, contracts slipped away, partners withdrew, banks hesitated. The machine Victor had built, the fortress of power that once made him untouchable, was being dismantled from within. For the first time in his life, Victor was losing. But he was not the man he had been before her. The Victor who had lived for dominance alone would have scorched the earth, burned everything to ash just to prove he could not be defeated. Now, standing with her hand in his, he began to see something different. It was not enough to survive. It was not enough to win. He wanted something more enduring, more human, something he had never let himself want before. The attacks grew sharper. An ambush one night as they drove home, black cars swarming the street, bullets cracking the night air. Victor's men returned fire, metal screaming against glass, the city flashing with violence. She sat frozen in the back seat as Victor shielded her with his body, his arm around her, his voice steady even in the chaos. "Look at me," he whispered, forcing her eyes to his. "Not them. Me." And she did. Somehow, through the gunfire, through the shriek of tires and the shattering of glass, all she saw was him. His face close to hers, his breath hot against her skin, his eyes blazing with something unbreakable. When it was over, when the attackers fled into the night and the car limped back under the cover of his security, she realized something terrifying and beautiful. She no longer cared if he was the most feared man in the city. To her, he was the man who had risked everything to keep her safe. But Morozov was not finished. The next strike came in the form of lies. Newspapers printed headlines filled with scandal, stories twisted with half-truths and venom. They painted her as a schemer, a gold digger, a woman who had wormed her way into Victor's empire to tear it apart from the inside. Strangers on the street looked at her with contempt. Women spat her name. Men laughed. The humiliation was a fire that burned her from within. Victor raged when he saw the papers. He summoned editors, threatened lawsuits, silenced voices with a single phone call. But she stopped him, her hand pressing against his chest. "No. Let them talk. We know the truth. That's all that matters." Her quiet strength stunned him. He had expected tears, fury, the collapse of someone crushed beneath the weight of scandal. Instead, she stood taller, her chin lifted, her eyes unwavering. And in that moment, Victor realized she was stronger than he had ever been. Not because she wielded power, but because she didn't need it. It was she who saved him in the days that followed. When the empire wavered, when the board turned restless and partners threatened to flee, she was the voice that steadied him. "You've built everything on fear," she told him. "But fear crumbles. Build it on trust, on loyalty, on something that lasts." At first, he resisted. Trust was weakness, loyalty was illusion. But as the walls of his empire trembled, he found himself listening. Slowly, reluctantly, he began to let others in, not as pawns, but as allies. And for the first time, Victor Orloff discovered a weapon sharper than fear: respect. The final confrontation came in a place as cold and glittering as the world they inhabited, a rooftop high above the city, where the skyline burned with lights and the wind carried the scent of winter. Morozov stood across from him, flanked by men who had once bowed to Victor, now turned traitors. "You've built your empire on ashes," Morozov sneered. "It's time someone put it out for good." Victor stood tall, the woman at his side. He could have answered with threats, with promises of destruction. But instead, his voice was calm, steady. "You think you've taken everything from me. But you've only shown me what I truly have." He glanced at her, his hand finding hers, their fingers locking like iron. "You can strip me of money, of power, of fear. But you cannot touch this. And that makes me stronger than you will ever be." Morozov laughed, but it was hollow. The men behind him shifted, uncertain. They had expected fire, fury, violence. What they saw instead was a man who had chosen something greater than all of them combined. A man who no longer fought for dominance, but for love. And love, they realized, was a weapon they could not match. That night, Morozov retreated. Not because Victor had crushed him with wealth or violence, but because Victor had become untouchable in a way Morozov would never understand. He had found something that no amount of betrayal could erase. The empire did not collapse. It transformed. In the months that followed, Victor rebuilt, not with the iron fist of his father, but with the open hand of a man who had learned what it meant to trust. His company grew stronger, leaner, driven not by fear but by vision. And at his side, always, was the woman who had walked into his office looking for a job and found a destiny instead. Their love was not easy. It was forged in storms, tested by enemies, haunted by scars. But it was real. And it was fierce. At night, when the city lights flickered below their penthouse, Victor would hold her close, whispering against her hair, "You saved me from becoming the man my father wanted me to be." And she would smile, tracing the lines of his face, and answer, "No. You saved yourself. I only reminded you that you could." Years later, people would still whisper his name with fear, with awe, with envy. Victor Orloff remained the most powerful man in the city. But those who knew him closely, those who worked at his side, noticed a change. His gaze was softer, his temper slower to ignite, his decisions less cruel. He was still feared, yes. But now he was respected too. And when they whispered about the woman who walked beside him, the whispers carried something else: admiration. They said she had tamed the untamable, that she had melted the ice in his veins, that she had become the one thing in his life more valuable than all the fortunes he had ever built. They were wrong. She hadn't tamed him. She had loved him. And in return, he had learned to love himself. On quiet evenings, when the world's noise faded and only the two of them remained, she would remember the girl she had been, the girl who had walked into that glass tower desperate for work. She would smile at the memory, marveling at the cruel, miraculous twist of fate that had brought her here, into the arms of the man everyone else had feared. And Victor, watching her, would remember the man he had been, the monster, the tyrant, the son of a father who had taught him to survive but never to live. He would hold her closer then, pressing his lips to her temple, whispering the truth he had once thought impossible. "Yes," he would say softly, almost to himself, "even a man like me can be loved." And in that moment, beneath the endless sky, with the city at their feet and the storm long behind them, they both knew their story had not ended. It had only just begun.